At 30, a man suspects himself a fool, knows it at 40, and reforms his plan. At 50, chides his infamous delay, pushes his prudent purpose to resolve, and in all the magnanimity of thought resolves and re-resolves, and then dies the same. 3 thoughts about this. Number 1, time flies. There was a preacher that I was listening to. He told a story that when he was young, when he was a teenager, he and his father went to visit a man in the hospital who was dying of cancer, an older man. And this preacher was a teenager at the time, and the older man who's in the hospital bed would lie there through the night. And one night he called this young man over and he says, "Come over here." And he had him bend over and whispered in his ear. He said, "Do you know that I'm dying?" And the young man said, "Yes, I do." And the old man said, "You are too." The point being, you'll be in this very situation before you know it. Time is valuable. You could have all the cars in the world, but if you had no gasoline, what good is having all the cars in the world? You could have all the light bulbs in a dark world, but if you had no electric, what good is having all the light bulbs in the world? You could have all the talent, all the money, all the knowledge, but if you have no time, what good are all those things? And then procrastination robs time. That was the problem of the man. He chided his infamous delay. He had said, "I'm going to change" at 30. And then at 40, he hadn't changed. At 50, that's 20 long years. He still hasn't changed because he's been procrastinating this whole time. I suggest that many Christians procrastinate, and I'll tell you that I'm guilty. If anybody in here is guilty, I am just as guilty as you are. Many Christians procrastinate. How many times have you said, "I will," and then you fill in the blank, the spiritual work, that either read more or read a text. I'm going to tackle Proverbs today. Or pray more, or help somebody more, or whatever the case might be. How many times? And then by the time 8 o'clock rolls around that night, you realize you've lost. You failed. And then the next night, and then it turns into a week and a month, and we realize that we haven't accomplished what it is we said we would do. So tonight's lesson is going to be about procrastinating. The theme is simple sermons, simply about living every day in simple faith. And this is lesson number 2. I am grateful to be standing before you. It is a huge responsibility to lead a congregation, whether preaching or praying or singing songs, whatever it might be. We're supposed to leave here more equipped than when we walked in, built up. And I pray that you will be built up. I think that today's lesson is simple. It might be full. I hope you leave here full. So, we will begin looking at reasons for procrastinating. And I don't claim that this is exhaustive or thorough. It might be exhausting, but it's not exhaustive. Reasons. Reason number 1 that I can come up with is false confidence in tomorrow. If you turn to James chapter 4, we'll talk about this. James 4, verse 13 says, "Come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, engage in business, and make a profit." Okay, understand that it says today or tomorrow we will. And it would be really nice if all the translations had that "we will" in there. I know all of them seem future, but it would bring it out more. These people are saying tomorrow we will go to such and such a place. And we will spend a year there. And we will engage in business. And we will make a profit. They seem to know what tomorrow is all about. Not only do they know that there is a tomorrow, but they know what tomorrow looks like. That's pretty impressive. It's so impressive that the author will say, come now. And that's the word come. We have the expression, oh, come on. And the idea, if you can think of it this way, is the author is saying you need to come back to what's reasonable. Because what you're thinking is not reasonable. It's beyond reason. So verse 13 is the rebuke. Verse 14 is the reason. You do not know what your life will be like tomorrow, or literally, what kind of a life you have tomorrow. You don't know what it looks like tomorrow. You are just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Not only do you know what kind of a life you'll have tomorrow, you don't even know if you will have life tomorrow. This is about perspective. The author here is saying, get some perspective. Verse 15, the alternative, instead you ought to say, if the Lord wills. You see, we don't control as much as we think we do, right? It's not bad to make plans. That's not what he's saying. He's saying don't have too much confidence in the idea that those plans are going to come to fruition, or even that that time will happen. If the Lord wills, we will live and also do this or that. You see that? We will live. Oh, so you are alive. Oh, that's nice. And you're also doing something you think you do. But now we get to the root of the problem. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. This is actually the root problem of these people. This word was originally used by and referred to what we would call wandering quacks that come along and promise rain. I'll make the rain for you. I'm the rainmaker. And they'd go around the West way back when, say, oh yeah, you put the money in the hat and I'll make the rain. And whether or not they actually believed it, this word applied to them. You can't make rain. Even if you think you can make rain, you can't make rain. And to make this claim that, oh yeah, I can make the rain, the same kind of arrogance for, I'm going to make this plan for tomorrow. Marcy and I lived in Budapest and worked with the church there in Budapest, Hungary for a couple of years. Budapest is a city that is divided between, for you, Buda on the west and Pest on the east, and there's the Danube River that runs right down the middle of that. So there is a Christian there whose mother's acquaintance, it doesn't matter who it was, January 18th, 1945, the Nazis occupy Budapest. The Soviets are coming. The Russians are coming. And so the Nazis retreat to Budapest. It's up on the castle, the hill. They retreat over there. Here come the Soviets are coming. They're coming on the Pest side. Well, Emma's mother's acquaintance goes down on the Buda side. She goes down to the tram. She's going to get the tram to go from the Buda side across Margaret Bridge to get to Pest side. She missed it by footsteps. You've had that happen. While she's waiting for the next tram, the one that she missed is going across that bridge. The Nazis, to stop the Soviets from coming, blew up all the bridges. The tram went up in the air, January 18th, 1945, and plunged into the icy frozen river. Everybody died, men, women, and children. Now, unless they're suicidal, that is an illustration that they had no idea that there would not be a tomorrow for them. This can happen anytime, anywhere. I know or knew a 26-year-old Christian who died of a heart attack at 26 years old. His father said to me, I was talking to him at noon, and 6 hours later, he was no more. Just the other day, I heard of a Christian out in California. A father and his children went to the ocean. While there, a tremendous wave came, picked up the man, and slammed him to the ground, broke his neck, crushed his esophagus, and he died. This can happen anytime to anybody. You never know. That's reason number one. Reason number two, Misappropriating Today. And what I mean by that is saying, I don't have time to. Now, first point we make is this. Nobody believes this. Nobody believes you don't have time. You might think, I don't have the money, I don't have the talent, I don't have the knowledge. You might think that, but you don't believe. There's a comedian that makes a joke about going and getting eyeglasses. And so he goes and he gets eyeglasses, and basically the idea is, oh, I can see. I've got eyeglasses now. And then he thinks about how ridiculous it was that it took him so long to go and get his eyes checked. And his excuse that he makes up is, I don't have time. And his point is, how ridiculous it is to think, oh, I don't have time to see. I don't have time to see clearly. That's ridiculous. And to say that I don't have time to, and you fill in the words with some spiritual point, some spiritual work, that's just as ridiculous. God is not unfair. Ephesians chapter 2. It is actually, the context is more about perspective. So some people think, well, I'm going to work to become a new creation. I'm going to do this to become a new creation. Now, I understand that God has conditions for us, and we all understand that. But you have to understand, you have to have the right perspective. Doing the condition is not what creates you into a new person. That's the working of God. God works. And that's his point here. Now, we don't do works to become a new creation. You've got it backwards, actually, Paul is saying here. Once you're a new creation, you're created to do works. Ephesians 2, verse 8. By grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is a gift of God, not as a result of works, so that no one may boast. So don't have the right perspective. Don't think that, okay, I'm going to do this work to become a new creation. No. You are a new creation by faith in God and his working, meeting his conditions. Now, as a new creation, get busy doing work. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand so that we would walk in them. See, God says, I've got a list of good works for you to do. Here it is. It's your New Testament. Go ahead and read that. God is not unfair. He's not going to put you in a position where, I've got a list of good works for you to do, but I'm not going to give you the time to do them. He wouldn't do that. So my wife's father, there were 3 siblings. And the father and the mother would say, it's time to clean the house. And you know how siblings are when they're young. They wouldn't do it, or they'd do slowly. And then suddenly her father would say, you've got 5 minutes to clean the whole house. And they would run around screaming, crying in terror, because they knew what would happen if they didn't clean the house. Now, as much as that was effective disciplinary method, our God and our Father in heaven doesn't do that to us. You better get going. You better get going. I'm watching you. So I like to read history, at least a certain time of history. And you all remember King Cyrus. He's in our Old Testament. When Cyrus took over the kingdom, and when he took over what we would call Asia Minor, he left one of his servants in charge of his money, Croesus' money, the riches of Croesus. Well, the servant got in his own idea that he'd spend it on his own, what he wanted to do. And so he became Cyrus's enemy. So Cyrus says, go get him. And so this guy went to a certain city. It doesn't matter what city, it doesn't matter the guy's name. He went to the certain city and said, I want sanctuary. We all know what that is. Sanctuary is, I want to claim sanctuary here. That way my enemies can't get me. Now that was a big deal back then. It was real. And if you claim sanctuary, that was very important to that city, that they would say, okay, we'll honor this. We won't let your enemies come and get you. All right. So Cyrus comes up and he says, he knocks on the door of the city. I'm being a little figurative there. And he says, I want that man. And the city says, I know what we need to do. We've offered him sanctuary. So they go to the god of the city, Apollo, the false god. And they say to this false god, should we hand over this man? And the false god says, yes. Now, you've got to understand, that puts them in a situation where they are condemned if they do, and they're condemned if they don't. Because the precedent is, you don't hand them over. And the gods set the precedent, so if you hand them over, you're disobeying the gods. But one of those gods said, you need to hand them over. So if you don't hand them over, you're then disobeying that God. So one guy figures this out. He says, look, this is ridiculous. And he goes in and he says, you really want us to hand over? He goes into the people. You know, this is all false. But this is history. They go in. He says, you really want us to hand over this man who's claimed sanctuary? And the oracle says, yes. And so what the guy does is he goes to the temple and he starts taking all the birds out of the temple and shooing them out of the temple. Ripping them out of the temple and leaving them. And the oracle says, what are you doing? You're wicked. Those birds have come here for sanctuary. And the man says, wait a minute. You mean to tell me that you get upset when sanctuary and the rules of it are broken in your temple, but yet you want us to break the rules, and you're commanding us to break the rules of sanctuary? And the God replied that he did. He said, I did this very thing. I did so bid you. I told you to do that, he said, that you may the quicker sin and be destroyed. That's what we call setting you up for failure. Now, I understand that everything I've just relayed to you is a story about a false God. But when you say, I don't have time to, and you fill it in with a spiritual work, you are saying that our God is just as unfair as that false God. In the short of it, don't ever again say you don't have time. Now, I realize that y'all, if you could have, would have gotten somebody older and wiser up here speaking tonight than me. But I'm here. So what I did is I went and did some reading. And I read some older and wiser people. So this is not me saying this to you. This is them saying to you something about how we view our time. Oh, by the way, before we get there, despite what we think, we in 2019 are not uniquely busy. Oh man, we're so busy. I know a person who has 2 phones, and each phone has 2 phone numbers. That's 4 phone numbers that he carries with him. And it rings this way, and it rings that way, and it rings this way. Oh man, aren't we busy? And then we got our tablets, and we got to go here, and I got to take this, and I got to go there. And we think, man, we're so busy. Do you remember who Joshua was? Now, you don't have to turn here. Joshua was the ruler of the military. That's no small job. He's got to get all the logistics. The buck stops with him. He's responsible for it. And do you remember what he had to do? What's it say? This book of the law, this is Joshua 1, this book of the law shall not depart from your mouth. So on top of his job, what else did he have to do? He had to read this book. Now I know it was smaller than, so that you may be careful to do all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have success. It said, you shall meditate on it day and night. Daniel was ruler, number 2, depends on which time, of a kingdom. It was the largest kingdom that had ever been on the face of the earth at that time. He was either number 2 or number 3, or wherever you want to stick him. I mean, that's a busy job. Busier than any job I ever had. Yet what did he find time to do? Not once. Every day. Not twice. In fact, he had done this so long that he was known for this. 3 times a day. What did he do? He went and prayed. And I say he went. He went to his window. Now, unless he worked out of his home and telecommuted, then that also included he walked to his house and he walked back from his house 3 times a day when he wasn't reading Jeremiah. Don't ever say, oh, we're super busy. No, Marcy and I were riding home last night, and she said to me, the problem I have with this one song, it was a certain song, is that the song sings about, tell me about yesterday. Wasn't it great yesterday? Because in our mind, we think, oh, yesterday was so easy. The days of yesterday were just so calm. In fact, Ecclesiastes tells us not to think that, right? Don't ever think it. Here's the wise people. We cannot do everything. We must choose. We have to prioritize. This is what life is about. Now, understand this. God puts us on the world. That's what he does. And then he tells us to make certain choices. There is a class of choices that we don't even have to worry about. They're called sin. We automatically don't do that. Now, this gives us a whole broad class of the rest of things that we can do that we have to choose from. And you are not able to do everything that's available to you. It's impossible. You can't. And I'm not even talking about the things that are sin. We're Christians. We don't talk that way. No, just the things that we are actually lawfully able to do. All things are lawful for me, but not all things are profitable. We have to prioritize. So here's the wise people. The problem of having time is not a time problem at all. It is a mind problem. Now those harsh words, that's why I let him say it. It's going to get harsher. If one does not have time for God and family because of his work or recreations, let him just admit that he has got his mind in the wrong place. Reason number 3, waiting for a better opportunity. Let me give you an example, because we can pick anything. This one hits home for me. Should for you also. I am a supported preacher. But this job is for all of us. And that is talking to other people about our faith and God and how wonderful he is. That's everybody's job. Now here's a certain scenario, okay? You need to talk to somebody else about God. Reasons I have come up with, and probably you have too, I'm guessing, that you have not talked about other people about God. Okay, I'm going to talk to this person about God when I'm not on the clock. Because after all, there's work. And then, you got to respect. And I get that. I understand that. But then there's God. Right? I'm unprepared to discuss this specific topic. Okay, but the person who's prepared, were they born that way? Came out of the womb knowing everything I need to know on this one given topic. So I have an acquaintance from many years ago who was born 5 days after I was. That means we are exactly the same age. I became a Christian when I was 28. Some 5 years later or so I'm 30, 32, 35. I don't know how old I am, something like that. He was lamenting the fact that he hadn't yet become a Christian or that I had become a Christian. And he said to me, you've had more time than I have. That's how ridiculous we can get when we're making excuses. How about the inability to follow up? Oh man, because it takes follow up. Unless they're going to convert like that, right? You're on the train like the Ethiopian eunuch was. Oh, wow, there you go, wonderful. But the rest of them, it takes follow up. And man, I just won't be able to because I'm actually taking a plane to Chicago and this person's going to Florida. Well, remember that God can work things, right? He's pretty impressive that way. How about an inappropriate introductory topic? This isn't really the right topic. You know what? That might be true. You remember the talent Jesus had? He could take any discussion about anything and turn it. It's about controlling the conversation. That doesn't just happen by accident. And with us, it takes practice to be able to do that. I'm going to wait till he's alone, so I don't embarrass him. I don't want to embarrass the person in the group. And then you're alone, and you say, I'm going to wait till he's not alone, so he doesn't think like I'm trying to attack him. We could go on and on and on and on and on and come up with, there's a better opportunity than the one that's presented right in front of me right now. We can go on with this. Ecclesiastes chapter 11. There's a lot going on in this text, but there's one thing that I will bring out. Just from this verse, Ecclesiastes 11 and verse 4. The idea is, it says, he who watches the wind, speaking of wind, will not sow. Now, this isn't taking into account when it's got 110 kilometer an hour winds. That's unique. But that's verse 3, actually. Verse 3 is, if the clouds are full, they pour rain on the earth. Look, weather happens. Okay? And so that's verse 2 and 3. Verse 4. Verse 3 is about, look, life is going to happen, so keep on keeping on. There's more than that, but that's the short of it. Verse 4, he who watches the wind will not sow, and he who looks at the cloud will not reap. This person sees a cloud way off and he says, oh man, I can't work in that. The weather is not perfect. Somebody wrote, if a man neither plow nor sow till the weather is entirely to his mind, exactly suitable, the season will in all probability pass before he will have done anything. He's always looking for the exact right weather, and he misses the complete season. Some people look for a better opportunity, not realizing that is the opportunity. That's my life. I need to do better that myself right there. And then there are times when there are people who are doubting themselves. Am I the right person? Here, hopefully, is some encouragement. I find it funny and ironic that James 4 is about having too much confidence, and this passage is about not having enough confidence. What about me? Am I the right tool? Am I the right servant in this situation? Number one, pray. Because after all, you're just a tool. That's what you are. Somebody wrote, religious enthusiasm waits not to ask about possibilities of success. Religious enthusiasm waits not to ask about possibilities of success. You're not thinking about quote unquote success. You see the opportunity, you're enthusiastic, and you hit it. You go after it. We had a neighbor, stopped in one time, was telling me about his dog. It was something like a dachshund. You know, those little tiny things, little hot dog we call it. He said that it would go out and corral the cattle. Nobody told it wasn't a shepherd dog. I was listening to a radio one day and I heard about, I think her name is Hal Safina. I don't know how to pronounce her name very well. She was 72 years old last year. She's a bodybuilder. I don't normally pay attention to women bodybuilders, but what she said struck me. She's been bodybuilding since the time she was 59. She has 400 plus trophies, and she has never not gotten first place. That's pretty impressive. Now, what makes it more impressive is that she doesn't stay in her own age group. She competes against the younger people. The question was, how do you do it? And she said this, I don't do age. We have to open ourselves to believe the potential that we all have and not let age limit our power. Is this the right situation for me? I identify an opportunity here. Am I the right one? Well, you forget who's working behind you. Yeah, you're the right one because God, who has the power, has allowed this to happen. So go to it. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 4, we won't turn there, but it says, preach the word when? Only when it's convenient. Only when all the circumstances have lined up perfectly. That's when. No. Preach the word in season when all the circumstances are lined up and it's great. You come up to Canada, they're like, yay, Lee! And then, and then when, never done that before. And when it's not in season, when it's difficult, William, Jeremy, Brian, everybody, when it's tough for you, that's also when you preach. Or, not, it doesn't matter, to any spiritual work. Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12, verse 6. Since we have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, each of us is to exercise them accordingly. Romans 12, verse 6. If prophecy, and I understand that some of these are no longer available, but lots of them are. If prophecy, according to the proportion of his faith, if service in his serving, or he who teaches in his teaching, or he who exhorts in his exhortation, he who gives with all liberality, he who leads with diligence, and he who shows mercy with cheerfulness. There's an expression. It goes like this: fish or cut bait or get off the boat. And this is the idea. To fish, you need bait. And so what they would do is they'd catch a fish and they'd start cutting it up and they'd start using that for more bait, for more fishing. And so the choice was this. This expression is used several different ways. This way, the way that I'm using it right now, is you either choose to fish or cut bait or get off the boat. Now, nobody in here wants to get off the boat. So we're left with choose to fish or cut bait. What is it that you do well, or what is the opportunity that is right in front of you right then? And then there's avoiding unpleasantness. Apparently, Paul Earnhardt recently, or in the last 20 years, my wife listened to a sermon just recently where Paul Earnhardt was talking about, look, sometimes being a strong Christian is going to put you in a situation where it's going to be awkward and it's not going to be fun. Who likes that? William, you like that part? Are you? Does everybody like the part where it's not fun? No, we understand it's not reasonable, but we can sympathize with it. We understand, okay. So in these situations, this brings us to number 2. Results of the first part was reasons for procrastinating, and here we have results of, or results from procrastinating. There is eternal judgment. Oh, it's awkward. The last point I was making is, man, sometimes we want to avoid this unpleasantness. Whatever the case might be, wherever you're procrastinating, whatever you're not doing God's work, the last point I was making is because it's awkward. Yeah, well, remember this. Talk about uncomfortable. Matthew 5. We'll go through these 3 kind of quickly. Matthew 5. This is talking about urgency. This is talking about do not procrastinate. Verse 21. You have heard the ancients were told you shall not commit murder, and whoever commits murder shall be liable to the court. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court. See, the Jews messed it up, right? They messed up the interpretation. Look, just don't murder. You can be angry all you want. You can look and lust all you want. Just don't murder. Just don't commit the actual. Okay. So Jesus is saying, no, you've missed it. Don't even be unrighteously angry. That's the point. Guilty before the court. Whoever says to his brother, you good for nothing, shall be guilty before the Supreme Court. Whoever says you fool shall be guilty enough to go into fiery hell. Okay, be careful. Now, what if you have? Therefore, if you are presenting your offering, and it doesn't get any more ceremonially holy than this, at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, after you've presented your offering at the altar, done all that stuff, then go get him. No. Leave your offering there before the altar and go. First, be reconciled to your brother, and then come and present your offering. Make friends quickly with your opponent at law. And you know the rest of the story. Procrastinating sometimes costs us our souls. We don't want that. Procrastinating can cost the soul of somebody else. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, the man has his father's wife. What if he had died? Our children are always coming up with what-if situations. They're usually like, what if we had 3 heads? And what if we could fly? Those are things that are impossible, generally speaking, impossible to happen. Highly unlikely. These are not. My what-ifs that I'm going to talk about are not. What if he had died? Verse 3, Paul writes, "For I, on my part, though absent in body but present in spirit, have already judged him." There are two words here. The first one is have judged. And it has this idea. I've already done it. I did it then, and it still has ongoing impact right now. So get that. How does Paul think about this? He says, look, I already have. I'm not waiting. I already have. And then there's that word already. I have, and to be emphatic, I already have dealt with this. Now, apparently, probably, this is the same guy. So the church takes action. You know this. You know the account. And probably this is the one that is referred to in 2 Corinthians that repented. Whoever it is, the church in 2 Corinthians, the church had taken action against that person and he had repented. A year later, you can picture this. He writes back to Paul and says, Paul, thank you for not waiting. I'm not saying he did. I'm saying you can imagine it. The man repents, and he in sober thought, he reflects, I could have died. And Paul didn't wait. And you can further, Paul didn't like this kind of stuff. This isn't what they wanted to talk about. The man writes, I know it wasn't your favorite thing to do, but Paul, thank you for not waiting. And then there's the salvation of somebody who is not yet a Christian. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 is not talking about procrastinating. It's actually talking about persecution. But the result will be the same. Okay? So the Jews had persecuted the apostles and the prophets and the preachers and the teachers and drove them out of town so that those prophets and apostles and preachers and teachers couldn't talk to certain Jews. And the result is, in verse 16, hindering us from speaking to the Gentiles so that they may be saved. Did you hear that? If we don't talk to them, because faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God, if we don't talk to them, they can't be saved. So we were talking a few minutes ago about talking to other people about Christ. You've been going to the same cubicle for 10 years. On the other side of the divider, that same person's been sitting there for 10 years, or 10 months, or 10 weeks. And then one day, they're not there anymore. You don't know. Maybe they died. Maybe they moved. Maybe they're on the lower floor. I don't know where they are, but they're not there anymore. And you never talked to them about the Lord. Now, I understand that God can use other people, but maybe that was the opportunity. Don't procrastinate. It can cost. Then there's discouragement. Proverbs 15, verse 23. A man has joy in an apt answer. And, listen, how delightful is a timely word. This kind of word is always delightful, but it's especially delightful when it is timely. Man, I'm having a rough situation. Anybody in here ever have discouragement? Boy, it would be nice to have a timely word. And there are some we know who didn't get that timely word in time. And they let that discouragement take them where it shouldn't have. There was a man that I witnessed this situation. I didn't know it, but he was discouraged. He had been discouraged. I don't even know what it was about. Marcia and I were visiting this congregation that we know well. We know this man. He had been discouraged. It's time, it's their midweek meeting, and he says, I'd like to read something to the congregation. So, okay, the congregation says, go ahead. So he gets up and he starts reading, and he starts with this. I was discouraged. I forget what it was about. And so he let the elder at the church up the road know somehow, I don't know why he chose him, I'm discouraged. That elder tried to encourage him. That elder then went home and wrote him a letter, an encouraging letter. Sent it to the man. The man received the letter, read it, and became very encouraged. So encouraged that he came to the church and shared that whole thing, including the letter, with the congregation. What is this? How delightful is a timely word. You all know somebody who's discouraged. I bet you do. Now listen, I know you might be thinking, wow, yeah, but how are they going to receive it? That's not your concern. Your concern is to worry about how they will react to your timely word. Your job is to write the timely word. There is discouragement, and then there is spiritually stunted growth. And this for me, eternal judgment is scary. But I'm alive right now, and I know that I suffer this from my own mistakes. So right now I get to live with the regret of not having made the most of 1,000 opportunities. What am I saying? Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 5, verse 11, concerning him, this guy Melchizedek, and how Jesus relates to him, we have much to say, and it's hard to explain since you have become dull of hearing. For, though by this time you ought to be teachers. Okay, think about what a teacher is. A teacher is knowledgeable, faithful, and able. And you might add in there, loving, able to refute if they progress in their abilities, wise. James talks about wisdom. These people hadn't got there. This word, by this time, is through the time. The idea is God has given you this amount of time, like a child has 9 months to develop. And by the time 9 months have rolled around, that child should have developed to a certain point. This is what he's saying here. By this time, child, you should have developed to a certain point. Verse 14, solid food is for the mature who because of practice have their senses trained to discern good and evil. In the world, quite likely, this person looks like everybody else. Are you a Christian? Yes, I am. But you can't really tell. In the pew, they keep it warm. They stand and sing. They sit when they're told. Solid food is for the mature who, because of practice, have their senses trained. I'm not a big fan of the actor Steve Martin, but something he said caught my eye. He is also a banjo player. You might remember that. He was interviewed, and what he said about the frustration of learning to play a banjo or a guitar, but he's talking about a banjo. He said, and he's a comedian, you know he's a comedian in the way he thinks. He said, when I first started practicing, I'd be particularly frustrated. I would say, well, if I just stay with it, one day I'll have been playing for 40 years. As though that's all he gets out of it. But here's the point. Some of us struggle. And if nothing else, God knows you've been trying for 40 years. But often the case is, with this person, they are what we call a classic underachiever, Who wants to be the classic underachiever here? No? He's laughing. Yeah, I don't want to be. Right, we don't want to be that. And God has given us ability, and they differ. The question is, the question is not, am I like William? My talent's like William's? No, that's not the question. The question is, whatever he has given me, am I making the most of me with his power and for him? Ronald Wayne, some of you might recognize that name. He was one of 3 co-founders of a little company called Apple. He joined that company and was with them for all of 12 days. When he sold back his 10% shares for $800. In 2018, they were worth $92 billion. Would it be profitable for him to go around kicking himself the rest of his life? No. Here's why. He had no idea at the time. But every time there's an opportunity in front of me to grow a little bit, and I don't make the most of it, there's too much reason to kick myself. There's a story. It's a folk tale. It's a Scandinavian folk tale. Here's the point. Every time we do not make the most of an opportunity, we do not grow. We stunt ourselves. Now, I'm not saying that we won't grow in the future. I'm saying we just missed an opportunity to grow right then. This story is about trading down. There's a man who owns 2 cows and decides to bring one to town to sell. After a day in town, he is unable to sell his cow. But since he is just as well off as before, he decides to go home. On his way home, he runs into another man who has a horse, and he trades the cow for a horse. Next, he meets another man with a pig. He trades the horse for a pig. Then he comes to another man with a goat. He trades the pig for a goat. He comes to a goat. He trades his goat with another man for a sheep. After the sheep, he trades another man for a goose, then a rooster. He then realizes he's famished and needs food, so he sells his rooster to buy some food, leaving him to go home empty-handed. If you let too many opportunities to go by, you become trading down and down and down and down. Who wants that? We don't. I am sorry that I am not the person I could have been if I had made the most of those thousand opportunities. I imagine I'm not alone. There was a young woman. She's an Olympic gymnast. She said this: the Olympics was never my goal. It was something that was put in front of me because that's what my talents allowed. Now, I want to be, Lord willing, someday I might even be an elder. I'd like that. I don't know if I'd like it. That's a godly desire. Maybe. I don't know. Do you think of Mary? Do you think she wanted to be the mother of the Lord? That's my goal. I'm going to grow up to be the mother of the Lord. No, but she's a godly, humble woman. I never wanted to be, my goal was never to be the mother of the Lord. It was something that was put in front of me because that's what my talents or what I had worked. I was obedient, I was humble, and that's just what I did for the Lord. And wham, he plopped in my lap the greatest blessing any woman has ever had. The same thing applies for us. Look, I want to be all that I can be. And maybe God someday will use me for something wonderful. For right now, he's just using me going down the street and talking to people. At least he's trying to use me for that. How many times do I pass it up? Okay. We'll close with these thoughts. It'll take us a minute. Note well Psalm 90. So in Psalm 90, Moses writes about how quickly life goes by. Again, in poetry, there's always a lot going on. One thing that is happening in verse 10, as for the days of our life, they contain 70 years, or if due to strength, 80 years, yet their pride is but labor and sorrow, for soon it is gone and we fly away. Life is short. The next verse is this. Who understands the power of your anger and your fury according to the fear that is due you? That's interesting. Verse 1, life is short. Verse 2, you can be angry. I wonder what he's trying to think about. He's trying to think about, at the end of my short life, how can I get it to be that the Lord is not angry with me? Verse 12, so teach us to number our days, that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. People need to understand that life is short. It can be even shorter than we know. So count the days and think, today, I'm not going to waste my time walking around the mall. I'm going to go home. I'm going to pick up my Bible. I'm going to read. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to pray. And then I'm going to go out. I'm going to try to talk to somebody. Somebody said, the Christian cannot afford to meander through life, winging it, wasting time on trivia. He understands, trivial things, I suppose. He understands that the only wise expenditure of life is for something that will outlast it. He ought to make each day count for eternity. That's Gary Henry. So, how do we stop procrastinating? It's pretty easy. It's as easy as A, B, and C. Admit the problem. I don't want you to raise your hands because I know they'd all go up. And I'll be the first one to raise the hand. I've got the problem. Begin living in the today, right now. Some people live in the future. Some people live in the past. Oh man, I remember I was strong. Remember that time we went and did that work together, that spiritual work? And the premise is, I was strong. What about right now? And then there's other people who, man, I've never been much of anything of my own choosing, but I will be. You wait and see. Paul, in Philippians, Philippians 3, verse 12, not that I have already obtained it or have already become perfect, but I press on so that I may lay hold of that for which also I was laid hold of by Jesus Christ. Brethren, I do not regard myself as having laid hold of it yet, but one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind, reaching forward to what lies ahead. Do you hear that? He has three perspectives in mind. He forgets what lies behind. Actually, not really. Because you remember what Paul said about himself? He was the foremost of sinners. He doesn't actually forget it. He doesn't let that weigh him down. He uses that to motivate himself. I've hurt God. I am sorry. I will never forget it. What can I do? God loves me. He saves me. What can I do for him? And then it says, reaching forward to what lies ahead. So he's thinking about the future, but when is he acting? The present tenses will tell us. Forgetting. Right now, I'm forgetting what lay behind. Reaching forward to what lies ahead. When? Right now. I'm reaching forward right now. I press on right now toward the goal for the prize of the upward call in Christ Jesus. Let us therefore, as many as are perfect, have this attitude. And if anything, you have a different attitude, God will reveal that to you also. However, let us keep living right now by that same standard to which we have obtained. And finally, commit yourself to God. Ephesians 5, this is the last passage for today. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 15. Therefore, be careful how you walk. Yeah, life is short. That's the verses just before this were talking about the wrath of God coming on the sons of disobedience. I don't want that. Nobody in here wants that. Paul is saying this can happen to you. You don't want that. Okay, what do I do? Verse 15, therefore be careful how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, right? Don't just walk around the mall of life. No, have purpose, have intent. Making the most of your time because the days are evil. So then, here's prescription number 1. Do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. That has to do with studying, doesn't it? You can't understand initially what the Lord's... There's more going on here, actually. It's more prove the will of the Lord. So first you've got to know it. You've got to study it. And then the idea is this. Does it really work? And so you take it, and in faith you go out and you apply it, and you see, yes, God was right. It does really work. That's what he's saying here. Study it, learn it, do it. Verse 18, do not get drunk with wine, for that is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit. And then he'll tell us how. Speaking to one another with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing and making melody with your heart to the Lord. That has to do with worshiping. Verse 20, always giving thanks, pray for all things in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ to God, even the Father. By the way, a little teaser for tomorrow if you want one. Tomorrow we're going to have 2 sermons on prayer. That's part of making the most of our time right now. And then verse 21, and being subject to one another in the fear of Christ. Wives, be subject to your husbands. Husbands, love your wives. Children, obey your parents. Fathers, do not provoke your children. Slaves, be obedient. And masters, do the same things. There's a short exposition on Ephesians chapter 5 and 6, right? You notice what all these have in common? They all focus on the Lord. Verse 17, do not be foolish, understand what is the will of the Lord. Verse 19, we're singing and making melody with our heart to the Lord. Verse 20, we're giving thanks for all things in the name of our Lord. And then in verse 21, we're being subject to one another in the fear of Christ. A short question is this that you can ask yourself. What changes in my daily routine can I make to start doing a little bit more of this each day? You'll have to answer that on your own. Let me close with this thought. There was a woman named Crazy Maisie Devore. Crazy Maisie. Love that name. For 30 years, from the time she was 52 to the time she was 82. No spring chicken here. She scoured trash barrels, town streets, back roads, rain or shine. Often she would skip eating lunch to search for recyclables. She had a job. It wasn't this. Her own children told her that she should quit. She crushed 6 million cans, turned in 90 tons of recyclables, and when she wasn't able to do that, she made wild berry jam and she crocheted. All this to raise $100,000 to build a public swimming pool in Eskridge, Kansas in 2001. From the time she was 52 to 82. Let me ask you something. Was she Superwoman? She said no. In the interview, she said this, if I set my mind on something, that's the key. Set your mind. Focus on it. I just keep plugging away until I get it done. Wisdom from Crazy Maisie. It's as simple as that. I set my mind on it and I plug away until I get it done. If Crazy Maisie could do all this to spend her afternoons at a swimming pool watching children, what can we do to spend our eternity in front of our Father? Thank you for listening. It's been a pleasure to speaking here today.